Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. If you really think about it, humanity's greatest superpower is our absolute obsession with constructing narratives. We do this constantly, both backward into our history and upward into the divine. From the histories we mistakenly believe, all the way to the spiritual worlds we meticulously build, we're just a species that literally cannot survive without a good story. So you might be wondering, what do Cinderella's glass slippers, pristine white marble statues from antiquity, and the actual origins of heaven all have in common? Well, honestly, everything you thought you knew about them is probably wrong. As we're going to see, these are entirely constructed realities. They've been built up over centuries by historical mistranslations, political propaganda, or shared theological blueprints. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at fictions of the past. Then, whitewashing our history. Third, the roots of faith. Fourth, Eastern paths to harmony. And finally, modern and blended beliefs. Let's get into it. Section 1, Fictions of the Past, Drama over Data. Okay, let's take the myth of the pyramids. We always picture these massive structures being built by armies of slaves whipped into labor, right? It's a powerful, memorable image, but it's totally wrong. Archaeological evidence actually proves the builders were respected, paid workers. They even got wages in bread and beer. They received medical care, lived in nearby villages, and left proud graffiti inside, calling themselves things like the Friends of Khufu. And slaves don't typically name their work gangs like a local softball team. Hollywood loves to tell us two men enter, one leaves. But the actual financial reality of gladiators? Completely different story. In truth, about 80% of matches ended in survival or surrender. Gladiators were incredibly expensive celebrity athletes, complete with fan clubs and groupies. Training and housing a skilled fighter took years of investment, and having them die in every single match would be absolutely financially catastrophic. I mean, it'd be exactly like buying $1 million racehorse and just shooting it after its first race. The spectacle was really in the skill, not just the killing. We just eagerly adopt the more dramatic narrative. Take the Salem witch trials, for example. 0 witches were actually burned there. None. All 20 victims were either hanged or, in one really horrific case, pressed to death. American colonists were using English legal traditions, which mandated hanging. But we've totally absorbed that fiery, horrifying European witch trial imagery into our own American history simply because, well, let's face it, burning at the stake feels way more medieval and just makes for a better dramatic narrative. Moving on to Section 2, Whitewashing Our History, Inventing the Image. So, for centuries, Western art has revered the pure, minimalistic white marble of ancient Greek and Roman statues. We see it as the absolute embodiment of classical beauty. But here's the twist. These ancient statues were actually completely covered in bright skin tones, vibrant clothing, and painted eyes. Because the paint simply wore off over millennia, Renaissance artists incorrectly assumed the ancients preferred pure white stone. And that one little mistaken assumption ended up shaping literally 500 years of Western aesthetics. And then there's this infamous number 30. We constantly hear that the average medieval lifespan was just 30 years old, right? But this statistic is, frankly, mathematically illiterate. It includes a catastrophic 30 to 50% infant mortality rate. When you average in thousands of deaths at age 0 or 2, yeah, the overall number plummets. But actually, if you survived childhood back then, you didn't just magically drop dead on your 30th birthday. You could easily expect to live well into your 60s or 70s. It's wild how pop culture has completely rewritten our visual reality. Real cowboys, they wore practical bowler hats, not Stetsons. Pilgrims wore really colorful clothing. Those stark black outfits with the buckles were entirely imagined by Victorian artists centuries later. And the legendary noble samurai, actually, many of them were essentially mercenaries. And that romantic Bushido code was largely a nostalgic invention created later during peacetime. Even Cinderella's famous glass slippers were likely just a French translation error, swapping there, meaning squirrel fur, for verre, which means glass. Our most iconic historical images are almost always much later inventions. All right, Section 3, The Roots of Faith, Blueprinting Belief. As we pivot from the fictions of history to the frameworks of faith, looking at the foundational age of these belief systems helps us trace how our search for meaning evolved over time. We go from the earliest indigenous beliefs of prehistory to the ancient philosophies of Hinduism some 4,000 years ago to the covenant of Judaism, right up to the highly structured cosmic battles formalized in ancient Persia. Let's actually start at the very beginning. Animism is the oldest belief system on Earth. Long before humans built formal gods or temples, they saw spirits in absolutely everything. They believed that trees, rivers, mountains, and even the wind had a living, aware soul that was worth respecting. It's this profoundly beautiful, foundational concept, and, it's still very much present in indigenous traditions worldwide today. Now, this ancient blueprint from Persia might actually mirror your own worldview without you even realizing it. Zoroastrianism established the concepts of one good god fighting one evil force, human free will to pick a side, a final judgment, a messiah, heaven, and hell. So the crucial point here is that it served as the exact architectural blueprint that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam later absorbed and built upon. Section 4. Eastern Paths to Harmony, Escaping and Aligning. Moving east, we find completely different spiritual frameworks, and they are incredibly distinct in how they operate. Buddhism seeks to completely escape the cycle of rebirth by extinguishing human desire through the Eightfold Path. Taoism, on the other hand, asks us to read the natural current of the universe, the Tao, using Wu Wei, which means effortless action. And then we have Confucianism, which functions more like a moral operating system for society, built on deep respect, education, and social hierarchy. To see just how far dedication to these principles can go, you have to look at Jainism. Devout Jain monks follow strict steps to achieve absolute maximum nonviolence. We're talking strict vegetarianism, wearing cloth masks so they don't accidentally inhale insects, sweeping the ground before they walk to avoid stepping on bugs, and even refusing root vegetables because pulling them up might kill microorganisms in the dirt. It perfectly demonstrates this razor-sharp logic that all living souls, down to the tiniest microbe, are absolutely sacred. A common thread running through a lot of these Eastern paths is the concept of samsara. In these frameworks, the end goal isn't necessarily arriving at some heavenly paradise. Instead, the ultimate finish line is moksha or nirvana. It's the complete, total freedom from having to exist as a separate self, driven by karma and suffering over and over again in an endless cycle. Finally, Section 5, Modern and Blended Beliefs, the Ongoing Creation. What really stands out about the 19th century Baha'i faith is its radical inclusivity. It doesn't claim exclusivity at all. Instead, it teaches that every major religion is fundamentally right. They believe Moses, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad were all messengers of the exact same God, just updating the message for their specific era. They've built this rapidly growing theology out of total religious unity, basically teaching that science, religion, and human equality all belong together. Now, if you think that's a unique blend, get a load of Cao Dai. This 1920s Vietnamese religion deliberately combined the world's major philosophies into one massive system. It features one God, alongside reincarnation from Buddhism and ethical structures from Confucianism. But here is the truly amazing part. Their official saints include the French novelist Victor Hugo, Winston Churchill, and William Shakespeare. They literally believe God chose these historical figures to deliver moral guidance, putting them in a spiritual hierarchy right alongside Jesus and Buddha. How fascinating is that? Jumping ahead to 1954, we have Scientology, founded by a science fiction writer. This framework teaches that humans aren't just people, but actually immortal alien souls called Thetans, who have been trapped in human bodies for trillions of years with zero memory of it. It uses paid auditing sessions to help members recover these true alien identities and clear deep spiritual trauma, which was allegedly caused millions of years ago by a galactic overlord named Xenu. Okay, let's just take a step back for a second and realize the sheer, staggering diversity of these modern frameworks. From 1930s Jamaica, with Rastafarianism seeing an Ethiopian emperor as God on Earth, to Mormonism teaching that humans can literally become gods of their own planets. Then you have Jehovah's Witnesses believing exactly 144,000 people enter heaven, and Spiritism from 1800s France teaching that spirits constantly evolve through reincarnation. The main takeaway here? Humanity is constantly assembling new pieces of scripture, resistance, and philosophy to try and explain our place in the universe. Which brings us to our final question. Whether we're crafting the nostalgic myth of a samurai's honor or seeking the salvation of an immortal alien soul, what profound reality will humanity construct next? As we've seen throughout this explainer, our historical myths and spiritual frameworks aren't just lists of facts or rigid rules. They're the ultimate